Reborn from the ashes of a loveless life, I chose the man who loved me in silence and built a new destiny with the one my heart overlooked in my first life. I had not asked for a second chance. I had not wept, begged, or prayed. My soul had already resigned to its tragic end when death welcomed me with bitter finality. I remember the stillness of that moment, the sharp scent of betrayal, the hollow echo of footsteps walking away, and the unbearable weight of realizing I had died alone in a house full of people who once claimed to love me. But fate is never so simple. Instead of oblivion, I awoke. At first, I thought it was a dream. The scent of instant noodles, the faint hum of dormitory lights, and the weightless sensation of being 19 again. My mind rebelled against the reality unfolding before me. I stumbled to the mirror and was met with a reflection I hadn't seen in years. A younger me, with eyes not yet dulled by heartbreak. It took only a moment to understand. I had been reborn. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, quite literally. I had returned to the start of the path that would one day lead to my ruin. My death had not been the end, but a cruel gift, a rewind of time, a second chance to alter the destiny I had so obediently followed. I was Han So-yeon, eldest daughter of the Han Corporation, the model heiress sculpted by years of etiquette lessons, strategic alliances, and silenced emotions. My life had once revolved around duty, ambition, and the need to maintain perfection. I had followed every rule, married the man my family deemed ideal, and smiled through the pain he handed me daily. That man Kang Ji-woo had was my husband, a man of icy charisma, with calculating eyes and a voice dipped in honeyed poison. I had once loved him blindly, mistaking his aloof nature for mystery and his silence for strength. But beneath his polished veneer, Ji-woo had harbored secrets that once exposed would fracture my very being. And yet in this life, I had a choice. I could do everything differently. I could walk away from the cage before it shut. I could reclaim my heart before it was torn apart. Most of all, I could turn toward the one person I should have seen from the beginning. Park Hyun-ji. He had been Ji-woo's cousin, a quiet shadow in our chaotic world. Where Ji-woo stood in the spotlight, Hyun-ji lingered in silence. He was always there, gentle, observant, and warm in ways I never fully understood until it was too late. He had loved me, silently and selflessly, watching from the sidelines as I destroyed myself for someone else. I had never returned his love, not then. I had been blind, and I had lost him too. But now, with time rewound and fate trembling in my hands, I could see clearly. I began again, cautious and quiet. This new life wasn't about revenge, it was about clarity, about finally living for myself. I didn't seek out Ji-woo. I avoided the gatherings where our families mingled and skipped the events that would tie our paths too tightly. I stayed on the edges of the elite world I once embraced and tried to simply be 19 again. It wasn't easy. Everywhere I turned, familiar faces reminded me of what was to come if I wasn't careful. The same classmates, the same professors, the same gossip that fluttered through campus halls like insidious whispers. I moved through it all like a ghost, haunted not by what had been, but by what could be if I slipped again. Still, my heart beat faster when I saw Han-jae. He hadn't changed. His clothes were simpler than Ji-woo's tailored elegance, his eyes softer, more earnest. He moved with the quiet grace of someone who didn't seek attention but drew it anyway. In the past, I had barely noticed. This time, I couldn't look away. I began noticing everything. The way he tilted his head when reading, the careful way he fed the stray cats outside the art building. The notebooks were filled with scribbles and half-finished stories. He hadn't told anyone he wanted to be a writer. In his family's world, such a dream was frivolous. He hadn't known then that I would become the reason he gave it up. The guilt crushed me, even if he hadn't yet lived that pain. I knew what the future held, how he would bury his dreams, how he would disappear into a job he hated to support a family name that never appreciated him. He had suffered quietly, while I had been too consumed by my own unraveling. Not this time. I approached him gradually, carefully. I asked about his stories, shared my own thoughts, and created space where he could exist as himself. And in return, I saw glimpses of the man I never truly knew, a man of depth, empathy, and unwavering patience. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, his words were meaningful. And slowly I began to heal. This life was not without its shadows. Ji-woo, ever perceptive, noticed my distance. He tried to reach out, his curiosity piqued by the shift in our dynamic. Perhaps, in this timeline, he still saw me as a prize to be claimed. Perhaps he simply disliked being ignored. But I did not give him the chance to weave himself into my world again. His presence lingered like a storm on the horizon, beautiful, dangerous, and inevitable. I had loved him once. That truth was undeniable. But that love had come from ignorance. I knew now what lay beneath the surface, and I would not let history repeat. Still, the strings of fate are stubborn things. No matter how far I stepped away from Jiwoo, the world kept trying to tie us back together. Our families, our circles, our past lives, they all conspired to return me to him. That was when my resolve hardened. I would not be a passive character in my own story. I would rewrite the script with each breath I took. And it began with small defiance. I turned down dinner invitations. I declined internship offers that were orchestrated by the Kang family. I poured myself into my studies, into music and literature, into moments that had once passed me by in a blur of obligation. And all the while, Hyunjae remained by my side. He didn't chase me, didn't push for more. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough. He made room for my pain, never questioning the depth of emotions I hadn't yet explained. He taught me how to laugh again, not the polite laughter I had mastered, but the kind that bubbled up unexpectedly and left me breathless. My feelings grew in quiet places, in shared cups of coffee, in books exchanged without words, and in the way our hands brushed accidentally and didn't retreat. I felt the warmth of love not as a wildfire, but as the steady heat of a sunrise. Yet peace is never permanent in a world ruled by image and legacy. The rumors began slowly, that I was stringing two men along, that I was rebelling against a match that had been all but sealed, that I was ungrateful for the life laid at my feet. My mother called, furious and sharp-tongued, reminding me of my duty and the shame I was bringing upon our name. She had always seen love as a luxury, not a right. I remembered the pressure well, the suffocating expectations, the constant reminders that I was a Han first and a person second. In my first life, I had folded beneath that pressure. I had surrendered myself for the sake of approval. But I was no longer that version of Soyeon. Hyunjae noticed the shift before I said a word. He sensed the burden I carried, and without ever demanding explanation, he offered understanding. Still, I could see the doubt forming in his eyes. Not in me, but in himself. He was beginning to question whether he was strong enough to stay by my side, whether he would become the reason I was cast out. I had to make him see what I already knew. That I had walked through fire to get to him. That I would burn down every bridge if it meant standing beside someone who loved me, not for what I represented, but for who I was. It wasn't easy. When your entire life has been shaped by others' expectations, choosing your own path feels like betrayal. I wrestled with guilt, with fear, and with memories of a life that had ended in blood and silence. But I also remembered the joy that had come from choosing love, even if it had been fleeting. This time, I wouldn't let go. I didn't know what the world would do to us. I didn't know if I could shield Hyunjae from the tidal wave that would come when I finally broke from my family's grasp. But I did know that I couldn't survive another life built on regret. So I made my choice. I turned away from the cold perfection of a future with Jiwoo. I turned away from the path that promised status but not happiness. I turned toward a man who saw me clearly, who loved me quietly, who never tried to mold me into something convenient. And in doing so, I turned toward myself. Love, when chosen freely, becomes both a weapon and a shield. It wounds those who cling to control, and it protects those who dare to stand against the tide. I had made my choice. I had turned away from the glittering promises of convenience and legacy, and toward the uncertain, tender truth of my heart. But freedom, I learned, came with a cost. The first to fall away was my mother. Her voice, once sharp with command, fell silent when I rejected the arranged engagement to Jiwoo. She had invested years into sculpting me into a figure worthy of high society, and now I was cracking the marble from within, exposing the woman beneath. Her disappointment didn't come in the form of shouting, but in icy silence. That silence was colder than any fury I had known. I was cut off financially. I lost the security of family resources, the weight of their connections, and the safety net I had never fully appreciated until it vanished. The world I had grown up in began to retreat from me. Parties I was no longer invited to, names that no longer greeted me, and mentors who turned their backs the moment I strayed from the path they had blessed. Yet amid the unraveling, something else began to grow. In the small, dim apartment I now shared with Hyunjae, I found something I had never truly known. Peace. There was no staff waiting on us, no luxury to fall back on, and no curated perfection. Just quiet mornings filled with coffee and scattered manuscripts, evenings wrapped in laughter and shared meals, and the sweet ache of finally living a life not dictated by legacy, but by love. Hyunjae, true to his promise, didn't let go. When the world frowned at our audacity, he steadied us both. He worked late shifts to support us, sold stories to small publications, and never once made me feel like a burden for choosing him. If anything, he made me feel like I had saved him from disappearing into the same silence I had once accepted for myself. And I wrote, In the quiet hours between classes and jobs, I began to chronicle my memories not as a diary, but as fiction. A story of a woman who had loved wrong, died broken, and returned to make things right. It poured from me like water breaking through a cracked dam. I bled truth onto every page, veiled beneath character names and imagined cities, but every word was mine. The manuscript became a mirror. It forced me to relive the pain I had buried in Jiwoo's betrayal, the nights I cried alone, and the final moment of my death. But it also helped me understand that I had been complicit in my own ruin. I had allowed myself to be chosen rather than choosing. I had mistaken endurance for love. I had confused survival with living. Still, the past does not let go just because we run. Jiwoo found me again. He arrived not with threats or demands, but with a look I had never seen on his face before: regret. He had heard whispers of my rebellion. He had seen the headlines about the Han family's black sheep. And now, he stood before me not as the man who once held power over me, but as someone facing the consequences of his own blindness. He told me that he had cared for me in the only way he knew how, that losing me had made him realize what he had taken for granted, that he wondered every now and then what might have been if we had started again differently. But by then, the weight of his absence in my previous life outweighed any hypothetical warmth in this one. He asked me without asking whether I was happy. And I was. Not because life was easy. It wasn't. We had debts, we had doubts, we had rainy days where nothing seemed to work. But we also had each other. I had a partner who never lied, who never left me alone in a room filled with darkness. I had laughter in my lungs and hope in my chest, two things that had been foreign to me in my first life. I let Jiwoo go not with hatred, but with finality. He had been a chapter, one I had read, misunderstood, and ultimately outgrown. His presence no longer stirred my heart. Only a soft ache remained, the ache of a life unlived, of chances missed, of truths discovered too late. When Jiwoo walked away, he didn't look back. And I didn't need him to. Time, in this new life, moved with quiet determination. Hyunjae's writing began gaining attention. Small publications led to larger ones. His stories, melancholic, tender, and honest, resonated with people. He wrote of longing, of missed chances, and of choosing love despite the weight of the world. I recognized myself in every word. We moved to a slightly larger apartment. We still argued sometimes about money, about work, and about the future. But the arguments never lasted. They always ended in understanding, in apology, in arms wrapped around each other after long days. And then one day, the past collided with the present in a way I had not expected. My book, the one I had written in secret, was accepted by a publisher. They called it a stunning debut, layered with emotion, heartbreak, and hope. They wanted to release it under my name. I hesitated. For a moment, I feared what exposure would bring. What would people say when they read it? Would they see the truth behind the fiction? Would Jiwoo recognize himself? But Hyunjae told me something with his eyes, not his words, that my story mattered. So I said yes. The book was released quietly at first, but word spread. It resonated deeply with women who had given up pieces of themselves for love, with men who had stood in the shadows of others, and with anyone who had ever wished for a second chance. It wasn't a bestseller overnight, but it was a heartbeat in the world, a pulse that said, "You are not alone." And through that book I healed. I received messages from strangers, from young girls trapped in engagements they didn't want, from older women who had walked away too late, from readers who saw themselves in the characters and found, through my pain, the courage to face their own. One letter stood out. It was from a woman in her 40s who had left her husband after reading my book. She said she wished she had known decades ago that she could choose herself, that it was not selfish to walk away from cold love, that enduring wasn't the same as living. I cried reading it, because I understood her, because I had been her, and because maybe, just maybe, this life had given me more than a second chance. It had given me purpose. Years passed. Hyunjae proposed to me not with a grand gesture, but with quiet certainty. We had been partners for so long. The proposal felt like a continuation of what we already had. We married in a small ceremony beneath cherry blossoms, surrounded by the few who had stayed by our side. There were no reporters, no business alliances, and no legacy transactions. Just us. And that was enough. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder why I had to die to find all this. Why did I have to suffer so much, love so wrongly, and trust so blindly? But perhaps that is the nature of life. It breaks you so it can rebuild you. It silences you so you can learn to scream your truth. It kills you in some ways so you can learn to truly live. I visit my old home once a year. I don't go inside. I just stand across the street and look at the house where I once became a ghost. It's changed now. New owners, new walls. But I remember the room where I collapsed, the marble that kissed my blood, and the sound of silence swallowing me whole. And then I walk away, because I no longer belong to that place. I belong to the life I chose, to the man who never gave up on me, even in a lifetime where I never saw him, to the words that healed me. For the second chance I never asked for, I used both hands. This life is not perfect, but it is mine, and that makes all the difference.